If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn in it to Luke chapter 8. This is where we're going to spend our time. There's a psychologist by the name of Maslow, and some of you in this room would know of Maslow's hierarchy. That is, there's a list of needs that human beings have, and he lists them in terms of the priority structure of what our needs are. One of them is significance. Now, significance is a tricky word because it's not talking about somebody being famous necessarily. It means that there are some means by which we know that we matter, that our life here on this earth matters to somebody in some way. If we feel ourselves to be utterly insignificant, if anybody feels that of themselves, I would say perhaps it would be a good thing to find out where you stand with the Lord, because it speaks to that directly. I'd like to go through this text today and see what we could learn about that. I'll begin reading at verse 43.
What chapter, Brother?
I'm sorry, chapter 8. Luke chapter 8. Thank you, Georgia. Verse 43. A woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She came up behind Jesus and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When everybody denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding all around you and pressing against you, and you asked who touched you?" Jesus said, "Someone touched me because I perceived that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at Jesus' feet. In the presence of everyone, she told Jesus why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now, this woman is in a desperate situation. You have to realize, of course, there's no modern medicine. So if you had something chronic like this wrong with you, probably, unless your body just healed it on your own, you were stuck with it forever. There was nothing that could be done because there's no such thing as a surgery or medicinal treatment that will solve this problem. And it says in the text that she suffered for 12 years. That's a long time to go through something like this. Luke says additionally, and it's funny that in the text that Luke writes, he leaves this statement out. Some Bibles have it there, but it's not in Luke's Greek, that she had spent all of her income trying to find healing. Luke's a doctor. So I could see where a physician might want to leave that part out, as they tell this story, professional courtesy sort of deal. I'm a doctor and she spent all her money with doctors trying to be cured. I don't want to talk about that too much. But she's embarrassed to come to Jesus, and she's embarrassed for reasons that you and I may not be familiar with. Before I go into that, did you know this story has a legend attached to it that came about in around the 3rd and 4th centuries? Eusebius, who is a church historian, a Greek church historian, said that this woman was so taken by the fact that she, and this is a legend, so doesn't hold any water, but that she was so taken by the fact that she'd been healed that she had a statue erected to commemorate this moment in Caesarea Philippi. Julian was the emperor at the time, and Julian tried to reinstate the Greco-Roman pagan religion of the Roman Empire. That is, Zeus and all the rest of the mob. And so he tore the statue down and erected a pagan statue commemorating one of the pagan deities, and that a thunderbolt came and destroyed the statue. That God sent a thunderbolt and destroyed it. I don't really worry about that sort of thing. I just thought, it's a kind of an interesting historical perspective on this. There were people, Eusebius being one of them, who said this woman had to be a Gentile because she came up and touched Jesus. This goes back to what I said a moment ago. There are reasons this woman was embarrassed about this that you and I wouldn't have a connection with because we're Gentiles. For her, she's Jewish. There's no doubt in my mind about this. 2 reasons. 1, her embarrassment, and 2, what Jesus says to her. "Daughter, your faith has made you whole." That would only be said to a Jewish woman. She's embarrassed because The scriptures are clear. The law is clear. Leviticus 15, I'm sorry. If you are a woman and you have an issue of blood for that period, as we call it, you're unclean if you're a Jewish woman. Anything you touch, anything you come in contact with in any way, a place where you've been sitting, a place where you've been standing is an unclean spot for 7 days. Now that's just the Jewish perspective. I'm not justifying it. I think it probably wouldn't fly today for sure, but that's what they thought. Well, this woman is unclean all the time, 24/7. She can never be clean. Then you look at this text where it says she came and touched the edge of his robe. What was significant about that? I think two things. One, Jesus was wearing robes that if you go all the way back to the 14th century BC and Numbers, you see what a devout Jewish man was supposed to wear. You wore a cloak, outer robe, and at the bottom of it there was a blue cord all the way around, and there were these little blue tassels that hung from it. Those tassels were there. If you read Numbers, you will find out the tassels were there to remind the Jewish man of the law. That's what this woman has grabbed, and it's significant because how did she get there? How did she come up to Jesus sitting on some platform? Everybody's around. That says so much about this woman's posture before Jesus. She's crawling. That's the only way she would have gotten to this part of Jesus' person, because those robes go right down to the ground. What I find significant about this is, you talk about significance, this woman was the only person in the world in that second when she grabbed his cloak and she was healed. The power goes out of Jesus. As far as God is concerned, that is the only person on earth. That's how significant she is in this moment. Jesus turns his full attention to her. In spite of this crowd that's pressing up against him, she becomes the focus. What chance does she have as a Jewish woman who is unclean of getting up to the rabbi? None. None. This episode also has a theological meaning which you may or may not be aware of. I think it's pretty interesting. This is one of those texts wherein we see the maker of the universe in the flesh doesn't know something. Think what that means. That's Philippians chapter 2. He laid aside the independent exercise of his attributes in order to be humanity. Jesus was all that God could mean in flesh, but there's a limit to what God can mean in flesh. He has to lay aside some of those attributes. So, what does Jesus say when the woman touches him? He doesn't say, "You touched me." He says, "Who touched me?" He doesn't know. Now, I've read commentators who said, well, Jesus just did that for the benefit of the woman. I'm sorry, that would make Jesus almost like a game show host. I mean, it'd make him try to deceive her in some way to make her feel better. No, he's saying it because it is what it is. He doesn't know who touched him in that moment. Now, what is so significant about this, beyond the fact that she becomes the only person in the world, look at the way she approaches Jesus. All right? She comes up to him. She doesn't say who she is. She doesn't say anything about herself. She doesn't come to him and fall down in front of him and ask him to heal her. She doesn't do any of that. She crawls up there and secretly touches the hem of his garment, and yet she's healed. What does that say to you and me? We don't have to get it right when we come to the Lord. If I want to pray to God, I don't have to get it right. I can come to God. He knows my heart condition. He knows yours. And so when we come to him, we don't have to get it right. This woman didn't get anything right. And yet she was healed because God saw her heart. This is like the prayer of a small child. Who thinks that for a 4-year-old who asks Jesus for something, that God doesn't hear that prayer? They may get the number of their verbs and their nouns mixed up. They may not even have a command of English that's anywhere near what we would think would be precise. Some of us still don't, right? And yet, God's hearing that prayer. She didn't have to get this stuff right. She's got what I would call raw desperation. It's kind of like a small child. Have you ever been around a small child? I have. And you come into someone's yard, and a really big dog is in the yard, and the big dog comes running up barking. What does a small child do? They go around behind you, they wrap their arms around your leg, and they don't care what they look like. They don't care whether people laugh at them. They don't care anything about anything except that you can save them from the dog. That's all they care about. This woman is just like that. She's coming to God as a small child. She knows she's unclean. She knows that she shouldn't be there. She knows he's a rabbi. She knows as a Jewish woman that there's no way, even just because she's a woman, she should come to Jesus like this. But she comes anyway. She doesn't get anything right. And God heals her. You know, we tend to look at people, I think. We live in a celebrity culture, and we look at people because they reach a certain station. We think they know something. You know, there are evangelists. You take any evangelist that you would say is your favorite. You're the Christian luminary for you. I don't care who it is. Just pick one. They don't know anything any more than you do. When we come before God, that ground is perfectly level. I don't care what a person has been doing with their time. If they believe in Jesus and they come to the cross and they ask God to listen to them, He's going to listen. He hears it. We look at famous people. I'll never forget when I was in grade school, we had the library. I loved the library because once you got done with your work, they had a magazine rack. And I could go to that magazine rack. I loved the magazine rack because, first of all, I just enjoyed magazines growing up. And I remember, everybody may or may not remember Look magazine. Look magazine was a big magazine. And it was mostly pictures. There were some captions in there, but mostly pictures. And I'll never forget a picture I saw. It was a retrospective remembrance of John F. Kennedy. Now, I don't care what you think about John F. Kennedy, but you'd have to say this was a great, famous person at the very least, right? And I'll never forget the full-page spread. Here he is. He was sitting at his desk. He was leaning back in his chair with his face like this and smiling because John, his little son, was crawling on the papers that were on the desk. That picture told me everything about people. We are all the same. All of us. And this is exactly what's going on here with this woman. Yes, she's unclean in Jewish culture. Yes, she comes to Jesus in a way that she should not. All that's true. But it makes no difference when she comes to Jesus. When she comes to God for help, God is going to listen to her. She would have been seen as completely unimportant. As a matter of fact, let me give you a perspective that would go even further. If Jesus were a rabbi from the temple, if he were a rabbi from the temple, and this woman had come up to him in this crowd, the temple guard would have been there. And they would have dragged her off. They might have beaten her for what she was doing. But you don't see that in Jesus. You see Jesus just saying, you come. I perceive power's gone out of me. And then when he turns and faces the woman, there's no condemnation. Doesn't call her out. Your faith has made you well. Man, this is who Jesus is. We get it so wrong. We think of God as some kind of taskmaster or somebody that is just waiting for us to do something wrong so that he can punish us. That's not who he is. Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. How much more information do we require to see what God is like than to see that? You know what's so fascinating? This may be profound only for me, but I share it with you all just because it's profound for me. You and I go outside at night, right? And you look up and you see all the stars spread out when it's not cloudy. Or you go, I remember I went to the Grand Canyon one time. You ever been to the Grand Canyon? You go there And I remember the first time I walked up to the rim, and there are no fences or anything, so you could keep walking and wind up in the Grand Canyon if you don't stop. But I walked up to the edge and I looked across, and you're looking anywhere from 3 to 10 miles. You don't have any perception of depth. It all just looks over there. And I'm looking at the other wall, and I'm thinking, what is that? And I could see this thing, kind of like this, and it was just barely moving. I thought, what in the world is that? And then somebody handed me some binoculars. It was a whole row of donkeys going down the hill, headed in. You can rent a donkey and ride to the bottom of the canyon if you so choose. It was so far away. The Grand Canyon is just that, grand. The stars. You look up there and you see a star in Orion. You are looking 100 million years into the past when you see the light from that star. All of that in front of us, you and I see it, but it doesn't see us. That says so much about who we are before God. We have been given the gift of knowing. Rocks don't know. The Grand Canyon doesn't know. A star in heaven doesn't know. We know. David says, when I look at the night sky and I see the work of your hands, the moon and the stars you've set in place, what are we mortals that you should take account of us, that you should care for us? But then you see this woman come to Jesus. He does care for us. We matter more than the stars. We matter more than the Grand Canyon. We matter to God in this way. Do we really believe that when we pray, God hears us? Do we really believe that? Do we come to Him like this woman in just utter desperation and say, God, my life is a mess. Can you do something for me? Can you save me? Can you bring me to a different life? It's not a formula. I wouldn't recommend crawling around in a crowd to come to Jesus like this woman did, but it says everything about God's character to me. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. The woman crawls up, grabs his cloak, shouldn't have done any of it, and she is rewarded for that. God saw something in her heart. We live in this world and we suffer from things, and we lock our happiness into things that are circumstantial. We lock our happiness into how it's going for us. We say, well, I'm healthy or I'm not healthy, or this is hurting or this is not hurting, or my finances are in order or my finances are not in order. I've got a job, I don't have a job. We lock our happiness into all those features of living, don't we? I mean, that's just kind of how it is. We're material beings, and so we want things to go well. And so we pray like that. And please don't mishear me. Don't ever stop. If you've got something you want from God, I'd say, God, where are my keys? That's a worthy request. Why should we think otherwise? But I do think that there's something that God's trying to teach. Is it better to have the circumstances changed, or is it better to be changed in the circumstance? In other words, think about somebody who's a athlete. They run races. They run the 400. Is it better for them to become really good at the 400, or is it better that the 400 should be made easier for them? That's kind of like life. We live here on this earth and things happen. Things come to us we don't like. Things happen to our bodies we don't like. Things happen to our families we don't like. Things happen all around us that we don't like. Which is better? To have everything around us change to what we like, or to have God make us able to live in it? That's a good question, isn't it? I think it is. It is for me. I think that human beings, we suffer from what I would call the Happy Meal syndrome. When Becky and I first moved back to Waycross, we had our son, who was not even 2, and this family, when Jackson was about 3 or 4 years old, moved across the street, and they had little kids. So instantly Jackson had playmates. I was very happy about that. On Saturdays, it became a tradition that Rip was going to take Jackson and whoever wanted to come to McDonald's. Guess what everybody wanted when we got there? Happy Meals. Now, I don't know if you've done any market research on Happy Meals, but it's interesting. You can buy a lot more food for the money the Happy Meal costs. Like, you get 4 nuggets, you can buy 6. And a soda and a big thing of French fries, bigger, for the same money that you pay for the Happy Meal. But guess what? The Happy Meal's got a toy. And so the kid, it doesn't matter that I'm going to eat less. What matters is the toy. Now, McDonald's is smart. They know that that toy, they're buying tractor trailer loads of whatever that is. So it probably cost them 3 cents. But then they can charge an extra 80 or 90 cents for the Happy Meal because it's in there for the same food, for less food. We're like that. We are. We want what we want. And it could well be that God wants things for us that we are not aware of that are way, way better. Way better. And He's making that way for us. See, I think the whole plan is engineered. I think God's really smart. And I think that He has engineered it such that we find ourselves in various conditions of misery. And that if it takes Him ramping the misery meter up to bring us close to Him, that's a better thing, to be close to Him, than to have the misery meter turned down. That's how it seems to me as I look at this world, as I look at my own life. What I love about this story is people think that in order to come to Jesus, you've got to clean up before you come, right? Look at her. This is a foxhole conversion prayer, right? The bombs are falling, the bullets are whizzing. God save me. And He does. What I love about this is, in all of her imprecision in asking God to heal her, nothing precise about what she did. She didn't do anything right. He healed her anyway because He cared about her. That's the same way we get to come to Him. The person who is absolutely in ruin in their life, for whatever reason, I don't care what it is, can come to God running from the flames of hell. And God says, you come. You come right on in. I've been looking for you. Isn't it funny? We try everything else. I've tried everything else. I don't know what to do, God, so I guess I'll pray. I don't know where everybody is, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me, pray with somebody else in this room. There are a lot of believers in this room, if you're not one, who would be happy to speak with you. I'll stay here as long as it takes as we close.